Late 1944. Snow falls heavy in the Ardennes forest. The trees are black against a gray sky. The air is sharp and cold. In the distance, artillery rumbles like a slow drum. A German patrol moves carefully along a narrow path, their breath rising in white clouds. Their boots are cracked and stiff, some wrapped with rags to keep out the cold mud. The men are tired. Their uniforms are worn thin. The patrol's leader, a young officer with hollow cheeks, raises his hand. The group freezes. Ahead, in a shallow ravine, they see movement. A small squad of American soldiers crouches near a fire, rifles stacked nearby. The Germans move quickly and surround them. A few shouted words in broken English. The Americans raise their hands. The fight ends without a shot. The captured GIs are lined up in the snow. Their faces are red from the cold. They look nervous but healthy. The Germans begin to search them. One soldier kneels to go through an American's pack. He pulls out a pair of sturdy leather boots. They are clean, well-oiled, with thick soles. Inside the pack, there is another set of laces neatly coiled. The German stares for a moment, then holds it up for the others to see. The men gather around, whispering. Another pack is opened. Again, there are spare laces. Another pack, the same. Each American carries them. The Germans exchange glances, disbelief on their faces. Their own boots are falling apart. Some of the men have tied theirs together with bits of wire or rope. Others have stuffed paper inside to block the cold. The officer picks up a pair of the American boots. He turns them over in his hands. The leather is thick and even. The stitching is precise. They look new, like they came straight from a factory. He looks down at his own boots. The seams are splitting. The soles are thin. His socks are damp. For a moment there is silence. Then one German mutters under his breath. Every man has laces to spare. His voice carries a mix of anger and awe. Another shakes his head and spits into the snow. The officer orders the Americans to move. As they march them back to their camp, he keeps looking at the boots. To him, they are more than just footwear. They are proof of something deeper. Later that night, inside a dim tent, the officer speaks with another commander. He places the boots on a table between them. They study them in the flickering light of a lantern. The second commander frowns. "These are standard issue?" he asks. "Yes," the first officer replies. "Every one of them had boots like these, and extra laces. Can you imagine? They plan for when a lace breaks. We do not even have enough boots." The second man nods slowly. He understands what it means. The Americans have supply lines that stretch across oceans. Factories work day and night. Trains and trucks bring endless equipment to the front. Even small details are accounted for. Meanwhile, the German army fights with less each day. Allied bombing has cut rail lines. Fuel is scarce. New recruits are sent to the front with old gear. Some soldiers wear captured clothing. Many go hungry. The next day, the captured Americans are held in a small wooden hut. A German guard stands nearby, stamping his feet to stay warm. He watches as one GI bends down to check his boots. The man pulls out a fresh lace and threads it through with care. The guard stares, unable to look away. His own laces are frayed and ready to snap. In the field, this difference becomes deadly. A German unit moves through deep snow on a night march. The temperature drops below freezing. Several men fall behind when their boots fail completely. They limp, barefoot, trying to keep up. The column slows. Orders are shouted. Confusion spreads. At dawn, American troops strike. Their advance is swift. Their boots hold firm. Their pace never falters. The Germans fight hard but cannot move fast enough. Retreat turns into chaos. Men are left behind because they cannot walk. After the battle, the field is littered with bodies. Among the wreckage are German boots torn to pieces. A few have been replaced with rags or even strips of blanket. The Americans move through the scene, their own boots steady underfoot. Back in camp, German soldiers talk quietly about what they have seen. One man says he would trade his rifle for a good pair of boots. Another says the war is already lost. They know they face not just an enemy army, but an entire system built to keep that army strong. In a small clearing, a captured American boot sits on a crate. Around it, German officers gather. They speak in low voices, each man holding one of the spare laces. The mood is grim. These simple items tell a story they cannot ignore. It is not about comfort. It is about preparation. The Americans fight in the same snow and mud. They face the same cold winds. But their army plans for the smallest things, down to a lace that might snap in the dark. For the Germans, every step forward is harder. Each mile wears them down. They fight as bravely as they can, but with less each day. The boots and laces are only one piece of a larger truth. The Ardennes forest remains silent except for the distant sound of artillery. Snow falls again, covering the tracks of both armies. The captured Americans wait in their hut. The Germans stand outside, cold and tired, staring at the horizon and thinking of what lies ahead. Early in the war, German soldiers were issued the Marschstiefel, a tall leather marching boot. It was well made, heavy, and built to last long marches across Europe. In 1939 and 1940, when the Wehrmacht swept through Poland and France, these boots were a mark of quality and pride. They were made from thick leather with solid soles, stitched carefully by skilled cobblers. A soldier could trust them through mud, snow, and long road marches. By 1944, that standard was gone. Years of total war drained Germany's resources. Leather became scarce. Factories lost skilled workers to the front lines. To keep production up, boots were made from cheaper materials. The tall Marschstiefel was replaced with a shorter ankle boot, known as the Schnürschuh, made with mixed leather and sometimes canvas. The quality dropped sharply. Soles wore thin after weeks of use. Seams split in the cold. Soldiers were often left to fix their own footwear using whatever scraps they could find. Some used wire to hold a boot together. Others stuffed paper inside to block out snow and keep their feet warm. There was no standardized way to repair or replace boots. Supply depots rarely had enough to go around. Soldiers relied on what they could salvage from dead comrades or captured enemies. In winter, when movement slowed and conditions worsened, these problems grew severe. A man with failing boots could not march or fight effectively. When boots fell apart, so did morale. A single broken lace might mean a man could not secure his footwear and would be forced to limp for miles, falling behind his unit. The U.S. Army faced the same mud, snow, and cold, but their approach was very different. American forces relied on a massive industrial and logistical system. At home, factories worked day and night to produce standardized gear. This included boots, socks, and maintenance items for every soldier. Each item was built to a uniform pattern. By 1943, the U.S. issued the M43 combat boot, a new design meant to handle harsh winter and wet conditions. It was made from sturdy leather with a thick sole and reinforced stitching. The design allowed for easy replacement of worn parts, like laces. Every soldier received extra laces and spare socks as part of their standard issue. These were packed neatly into their field gear, ready to be used when needed. On the front lines, American quartermasters managed a continuous flow of supplies. Trucks moved gear to the depots near the front. From there, items were distributed directly to combat units. Even during heavy fighting, these supply lines kept operating. This meant that a soldier who wore out his boots could receive new ones quickly. If a lace broke, he simply replaced it and kept moving. This difference may seem small, but in war it mattered greatly. German soldiers often marched until their boots literally fell apart. They fought while cold and wet, their feet blistered and bleeding. When their footwear failed, there was rarely a replacement ready. American soldiers planned for those failures before they happened. The extra laces were a small detail, but they showed how deeply the U.S. military thought about the needs of individual troops. A broken lace on a cold night march would not slow down a squad. A new pair of boots could arrive within days, preventing injuries and keeping units mobile. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, this difference was clear. German troops moved through deep snow and ice as they launched their surprise offensive. Many men wore boots patched together from scraps. Some units had men in mismatched footwear, even captured British or Russian boots. Others had no proper winter socks. Their feet froze and swelled. Frostbite became common. Entire units lost men not to bullets, but to exposure. The Americans fought in the same conditions, but their standardized gear helped them endure. The M43 boots, paired with proper socks and leggings, protected soldiers from the worst of the cold. When boots wore down, supply officers issued replacements. Soldiers were trained to care for their footwear, cleaning and oiling the leather when possible. The logistical system that supported this effort was vast. It stretched from U.S. factories across the Atlantic to ports in England and France, then by truck and rail to the front lines. It required planning, coordination, and resources that Germany no longer had by late 1944. One captured German officer examined a pair of American boots during the Ardennes campaign. He turned them over in his hands, studying the even stitching and thick leather. He noticed the extra laces packed neatly inside the gear. To him, they represented a kind of wealth and foresight his own army lacked. His men were marching on worn-out sawls tied with bits of string. The Americans were ready for problems before they began. On the battlefield, this meant mobility. An American unit could march day after day without losing men to foot injuries or frostbite. They could move fast, retreat if needed, and then counterattack. German units slowed as men fell out of the line, unable to walk. Officers had to make hard choices about leaving men behind. By the final winter of the war, this contrast was stark. The Wehrmacht was still capable of fierce fighting, but every step forward cost them dearly. Their supply system was broken. The Americans kept moving, their boots sound, their laces strong. A German soldier once summed it up after inspecting captured American equipment. "They fight in comfort, we fight in pain." His words captured more than personal suffering. They pointed to a deeper truth. The war was not only about battles and tactics. It was about preparation. German soldiers marched until their boots fell apart. American soldiers planned for when there's wood. The night was wet and cold. The forest floor was a mixture of ice, slush, and mud that clung to every step. A German infantry unit held a thin line along a small ridge, rifles fixed on the darkness ahead. Their breath came in sharp white clouds, their coats stiff with frozen sweat. They had been fighting for hours, barely holding back the American advance. Ammunition was low. Morale was worse. Suddenly, the silence shattered. American artillery opened up, shells crashing through the trees. Branches snapped and splintered. Explosions tore holes in the ground, throwing men to their knees. The German officer shouted orders above the noise, his voice hoarse. They had to pull back. If they stayed, they would be surrounded and cut off. The order to retreat spread through the line. Men began to move quickly, clutching their rifles as they stumbled through the swampy terrain. The snow turned to mud under their boots. Water seeped through seams that had been stretched thin from months of marching. One soldier slipped and fell. When he stood up, his boot sole ripped halfway off. He cursed and tried to keep going, but the boot flapped uselessly with each step. Another man's lace snapped in the middle of the withdrawal. He stopped to tie it back together, fumbling with numb fingers, but the frayed ends wouldn't hold. In the dark, he pulled a piece of string from his pack and wound it tightly around the boot. It held for a few moments, then broke again when he pushed forward through the mud. Each stumble slowed the retreat. The line began to stretch thin. The officer looked back and saw chaos. Some men limped, others fell, and a few dropped out completely, sitting in the freezing mud as their unit moved on. He shouted for them to get up, but his own voice was lost in the storm of retreating footsteps and distant gunfire. The swamp was swallowing them one by one. Behind them, the Americans advanced. Their boots were uniform, solid, and dry. The men moved in steady lines, their pace unbroken. A few stumbled on roots or ice, but they recovered instantly and kept going. When a lace wore thin, a soldier reached into his pack, pulled out a spare, and replaced it in seconds without breaking stride. It was routine, as natural as loading a rifle. The German rear guard tried to fire on the pursuers, but their positions were exposed. Rifle fire cracked through the night. The sound of the American advance grew louder. Their voices carried through the mist, confident and calm. The Germans reached a narrow stream, the only crossing point for miles. The first few men splashed through, boots soaking up icy water. One man screamed as the cold struck his bare skin. His boot had split apart completely, leaving his foot exposed. Two comrades dragged him to the far bank. Behind them, the rest of the unit bunched up, desperate to cross before the Americans arrived. As they waited, the officer saw more problems. Another soldier's boot was tied together with wire. It cut into his ankle with every step, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. Several others wore mismatched boots scavenged from dead comrades or captured prisoners. Some boots were British, others Russian. None fit properly. The crossing turned into a choke point. Men slipped and fell in the icy water. Those who could not get up were left behind. The officer faced a grim choice: save the wounded and risk capture, or push forward and abandon them. With tears freezing on his face, he ordered the column to move. The Americans closed in. Their advance was relentless, step after step. Their boots gripped the icy ground, their movements smooth and coordinated. They carried full packs but did not slow. A broken lace, a worn sole, a loose buckle. These things were solved before they became problems. Each man's gear matched the others, allowing them to operate as a single force. The Germans were scattered by comparison. The column broke apart after the crossing. Some men kept up the pace. Others fell behind, exhausted or crippled by their failing boots. Orders dissolved into confusion. Officers tried to regroup their men, but without the ability to move quickly, there was little they could do. As dawn broke, the gap between the two forces widened. The Americans overtook stragglers, capturing them with little resistance. Some Germans surrendered without a fight, collapsing into the snow with relief. Their feet were blackened with frostbite, their boots ruined beyond repair. Those who escaped marched deeper into the forest. The officer at the head of the column stopped to take count. He saw at once how many were missing. Half his men had been left behind. Some were prisoners, some were dead, and some were simply lost. That night, he sat by a small fire and wrote a report to his superiors. His hand shook as he wrote about the losses. He described how men fell behind because their boots failed. He explained that a single broken lace could stall a squad during a retreat, costing precious time. He wrote that without proper gear, his soldiers could not maintain speed or cohesion. Across the lines, an American supply sergeant prepared his men for another push. He opened crates filled with boots, socks, and spare laces. Each soldier received exactly what he needed. They lined up to collect their gear, checking each piece before packing it away. For them, this was routine. They did not think about how remarkable it was. The next day, when the advance continued, they marched with confidence. Their boots stayed tight. Their laces held firm. They crossed the same swampy ground where the Germans had struggled and moved without hesitation. The contrast could not have been clearer. The Germans fought bravely but were trapped by their own shortages. A retreat that should have been orderly turned into disaster because men could not walk. Their officers could not plan effectively because they never knew who would make it through the march. For the Americans, even the smallest detail had been accounted for. A single lace was not just a piece of string. It was part of a system designed to keep an army moving. That night, under a cold winter sky, it made the difference between a clean advance and a broken retreat. The swamp and forest swallowed the last echoes of battle. In the silence that followed, the discarded German boots lay half-buried in the mud, a mute reminder of how an army can falter when its soldiers cannot march. The Americans moved forward, leaving behind a trail of steady footprints that marked their victory step by step. The prisoners sit in a wooden hut, huddled together for warmth. A single lantern swings from a beam above, casting long shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind howls through the Ardennes forest. Snow drifts against the door. The German guards stand with their rifles slung, stamping their feet to keep them from going numb. Inside, the captured Americans speak quietly among themselves. They are tired but calm. Their boots are lined up neatly by the door, each pair nearly identical. Sturdy leather, thick soles, laces tied tight. Some of the men check their gear while they wait. One soldier pulls a spare lace from his pack, threads it through his boot, and ties it with practiced ease. He works quickly, not even looking up as he talks with his friend about the next meal or when they might be rescued. A German guard watches through the open doorway. His own boots are cracked, patched with scraps of cloth. The leather has split near the toes. When he walks, he feels the cold water seep in. He sees the American tie the fresh lace and looks down at his own frayed string, barely holding. His jaw tightens. Later, when the guards change shifts, one German steps inside to search the American's belongings. He pulls open a pack and finds extra socks, dry and clean. Beneath them, another pair of laces, neatly coiled. He checks a second pack and finds the same thing. Then a third. Every man has them. He sets the laces on the table in a small pile, staring at them in silence. A young German private standing nearby shakes his head. "Even laces," he mutters. His voice is low, almost a whisper, but the others hear it. "They even have laces to spare." The words hang in the air. No one answers. A bitter smile crosses the face of an older sergeant. He pulls at his own bootlace, which is frayed and thin, barely enough to keep his boot tight. He has replaced it twice already using bits of wire. He thinks about the men he saw on the march, limping because their boots had failed. The prisoners do not notice the reaction. They continue to talk quietly, their tone casual. One GI jokes that he will trade his spare lace for a pack of cigarettes. Another laughs and says he'd rather have an extra pair of socks. They laugh softly, the kind of easy laughter of men who have what they need and expect more to come. To them, a lace is just another small item, a thing taken for granted. The Germans exchange glances. For them, this small detail cuts deep. It is proof that they are not only fighting soldiers but an entire system that can send endless supplies across oceans. Their own army, once strong, now struggles to provide even the basics. As the night wears on, a few of the Germans gather near a fire outside. They speak in low voices, careful not to be overheard. One man recalls the early days of the war, when every soldier received new boots before a campaign. Back then, they marched with pride. Their uniforms were sharp, their gear complete. Now, they scavenge from battlefields and prisoners. Another man shakes his head. He says the Americans fight a different kind of war. "We fight with what we have," he says. "They fight with everything." His tone is flat, not angry, just resigned. The young private who had spoken earlier kicks at the snow with his damaged boot. "We fight for every bullet," he says. "And they have laces they do not even use." His voice cracks. He cannot hide his bitterness. Back inside the hut, the Americans prepare to sleep. They lay out their gear in neat rows. A sergeant inspects his men, making sure everyone has what they need. He checks boots, socks, weapons, and rations. It is routine for him, a habit drilled into him from training camps far from the battlefield. One private grins and holds up 2 spare laces. "Hey, Sarge," he says. "Trade you one of these for some coffee." The others chuckle. The sergeant shakes his head and tells him to keep it. They do not think of what this moment means. To them, a spare lace is nothing special. It is just another piece of equipment. If it breaks, they replace it. If they lose it, supply will issue another. Their focus is on the fight ahead, not on the system that makes this possible. The Germans watch through the cracks in the hut's walls. They see the clean socks, the strong boots, the extras packed neatly away. The sight eats at them. Each item represents something they cannot match. It is not just about comfort. It is about power. Later, when the prisoners are moved, a German officer inspects their gear before handing it over to another unit. He holds a pair of boots in his hands. The leather is thick, the stitching even. He presses his thumb against the sole. It does not give way. "These are standard issue," he says quietly to another officer. The other man nods, his face unreadable. The first officer places the boots back down, then picks up a spare lace. He turns it over slowly, as if it might explain the war itself. "Every man had these," he says. His voice is soft, almost a whisper. The second officer says nothing. He knows what it means. The Americans have planned for everything, down to the smallest detail. The Germans have no such luxury. That night, as the wind rattles the hut, the Germans sit silently. Their thoughts are heavy. The Americans sleep soundly, their boots lined up neatly by their beds. To them, tomorrow will bring new laces, new supplies, new strength. To the Germans, tomorrow will bring the same cold, the same shortages, and the same gnawing knowledge that they are fighting an enemy whose power lies not just in numbers, but in preparation. Snow covers the wreckage of burned-out trucks along a narrow forest road. The tracks of retreating soldiers cut deep lines through the ice. German supply wagons sit abandoned, wheels frozen in place. A single horse lies dead in its harness. In the distance, a German officer studies a map under the weak light of a lantern. His face is drawn and pale. He knows that his men are hungry, cold, and low on ammunition. He also knows that no reinforcements are coming. By late 1944, Germany's supply system was breaking apart. Allied bombers had destroyed key rail lines and bridges. Trains carrying food, weapons, and boots were bombed before they reached the front. Fuel depots burned. Even when supplies left the factories, they often never made it to the soldiers who needed them most. At the same time, American supply lines grew stronger. Convoys of trucks moved along repaired roads, bringing crates of ammunition, food, and gear to the front lines. Cargo ships crossed the Atlantic in an endless flow. Trains in France and Belgium carried fresh boots and uniforms to staging areas. From there, quartermasters distributed them directly to combat units. It was a system built to function like a machine, no matter the weather or the fighting. In the forest, German soldiers felt the difference every day. Their rations shrank. Many went to bed hungry. Some carried only a few bullets in their rifles. Even elite units like the Waffen-SS wore mismatched gear. Their once feared black uniforms were gone, replaced by whatever could be found or stolen. By December, many soldiers fought with boots that leaked water and uniforms that could not keep out the cold. The Americans faced the same winter, but they faced it with full bellies and proper clothing. Their standard M43 boots held up in the snow and mud. Each man carried spare socks and extra laces. When a lace snapped, it was replaced without thought. When boots wore out, replacements arrived within days. This consistency meant that American troops could keep moving. After battles, U.S. units recovered quickly. Fresh gear and replacements arrived as soon as needed. Trucks brought hot meals and dry clothing. Men who were wounded or frostbitten were evacuated to well-stocked field hospitals. These measures kept morale high and fighting strength intact. For German units, recovery was slow or impossible. Men stayed in the line even when sick or injured because there was no one to replace them. They patched their gear with scraps and returned to combat the next day. Whole companies were reduced to half strength, but commanders had no way to rebuild them. The spare lace became a symbol of this imbalance. It was small, almost trivial, yet it represented the larger truth. The Americans planned for every detail. They fought with a system behind them that anticipated problems and solved them before they reached the battlefield. The Germans fought with courage and skill, but each day they were forced to improvise. During the Battle of the Bulge, this difference shaped the fight. The German plan relied on speed. Their armored units pushed through the Ardennes, hoping to seize key towns before the Allies could respond. At first, they advanced quickly, catching American units by surprise. But within days, their progress slowed. Fuel ran low. Ammunition was spent faster than it could be resupplied. Columns of trucks and horses carrying supplies were destroyed by Allied aircraft. Soldiers went without hot food for days. Frostbite spread through the ranks. As their boots failed, men began to lag behind, turning a strong advance into a crawling retreat. The Americans, caught off guard at first, recovered with stunning speed. Trucks moved along cleared roads night and day, delivering reinforcements and supplies. Men who had been resting in rear camps were rushed forward with full equipment. New boots, warm coats, and ammunition flowed into the front lines. One captured German officer later admitted that he realized the battle was lost when he saw how quickly the Americans replaced their losses. His men had fought well, but each time they destroyed an American unit, another appeared with the same strength and better gear. Even German commanders understood that the war was no longer about tactics alone. It was about logistics. No matter how well a plan was made, it failed without fuel, food, and proper clothing. In a captured farmhouse, a German captain wrote a report by candlelight. His handwriting was shaky from the cold. He noted that half his men were unfit for combat due to lack of boots and frostbite. He wrote that they could not move quickly because their footwear collapsed after only a few days of marching. He ended his report with a grim sentence: "We are being defeated by their supplies as much as by their guns." By January, the German army in the west was in full retreat. The initial gains of the Ardennes offensive were erased. American forces advanced steadily, their columns of men and vehicles never stopping for lack of gear. German soldiers, out of food and equipment, surrendered in large numbers. On the ground, the difference was visible in every detail. Abandoned German boots lay in the snow, split and useless. Next to them marched American soldiers with sturdy footwear, moving forward without hesitation. To the Germans, this was a bitter truth. Even their best units could not fight without the basics. The Waffen-SS, once feared for their discipline and power, now fought with scavenged weapons and threadbare uniforms. Their reputation could not stop the cold or fill empty stomachs. The Americans never saw themselves as invincible. To them, their steady flow of supplies was normal. They did not think about the factories back home or the ships that crossed the ocean. They simply assumed there would always be more boots, more laces, more rations. To the Germans, this abundance seemed almost unreal. They saw it in the neat rows of spare equipment and in the way American units moved without pause. Each extra lace was a sign that they were fighting not just soldiers, but an entire industrial system that never ran out. By the end of the winter, this imbalance had become impossible to ignore. German officers spoke quietly about it among themselves. They knew that without supplies, their men could not hold the line. A battle could be won for a day, maybe a week, but the war itself was slipping away with every broken boot and every empty stomach. The spare lace, so small and ordinary, foretold their defeat. It was proof that the Americans would keep coming, step by step, until the war was done. The war ended in the spring of 1945. The forests of the Ardennes were quiet again, the snow melting into streams that ran past the wrecks of tanks and the ruins of villages. German prisoners marched past their former positions, boots falling apart, uniforms ragged. American troops stood guard, their own gear still uniform and sturdy, their boots lined up in neat rows outside their tents. In the years that followed, the memory of the war was shaped not only by the great battles and famous generals, but by small details that soldiers never forgot. Among German veterans, stories about the shortages became part of how they explained defeat. Many spoke of hunger, of frostbite, of fighting without enough ammunition. Some told quieter stories about the little things that revealed the vast power of the Allies. One such story was about boots and laces. German veterans wrote in their memoirs about the shock they felt when searching captured American packs. They described the moment they realized that every U.S. soldier carried spare laces, fresh socks, and clean gear. These items were not treasures to the Americans. They were standard issue, expected, and ordinary. To the Germans, they were symbols of something much larger, an enemy that had planned for everything. A former infantryman from the Wehrmacht recalled watching an American calmly replace a lace before a march. The man had 2 spares in his pack and thought nothing of it. The German wrote that in his own unit, a broken lace could mean a day of pain and a slower march, sometimes even frostbite. He said it was in that moment he understood they were not just fighting soldiers. They were fighting an entire industrial empire that could send even the smallest items in endless supply. These memories became part of the record of the war. Historians later read them and saw how deeply logistics shaped the outcome. The image of the spare lace became a way to explain the difference between 2 armies. On one side was Germany, skilled at tactics and capable of brilliant maneuvers, but unable to keep its soldiers properly equipped. On the other side was the United States, whose strength came not only from courage or numbers, but from factories, shipping lanes, and supply chains that reached across the globe. In military schools after the war, instructors taught future officers the lessons learned in those bitter winters. They used stories like the one about the laces to make a point. Planning a battle was not enough. Victory required planning for every piece of equipment, every meal, every replacement part. The phrase "amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics" became a guiding principle. It was repeated in classrooms, written in manuals, and passed down through generations of officers. The focus on logistics shaped how modern militaries trained and fought. Commanders learned that a well-supplied soldier could march farther, fight longer, and recover faster than an opponent whose gear failed. For the U.S. military, this focus on supply chains continued through the Cold War and beyond. The same planning that once sent boots and laces to the Ardennes now supported global operations on every continent. American forces became known for their ability to deploy anywhere in the world and stay there as long as needed. From the Korean War to modern conflicts, the same principle held: no detail was too small to matter. The Germans, rebuilding after the war, also studied these lessons. Their new army, created under NATO, placed greater emphasis on standardization and planning. German officers who had once fought in rags now trained soldiers to value preparation. They remembered what it felt like to lose battles not because of tactics, but because of a lack of basic gear. As decades passed, historians began to write about the war with a wider view. They looked beyond the generals and the frontline battles. They examined the factories, the transport networks, the warehouses full of supplies. They found that industrial war was decided as much by production as by fighting. The humble bootlace became a metaphor in their books and lectures. It stood for the unseen work that keeps an army moving. Museum displays began to include these everyday items. In some exhibits, a single pair of American boots is placed beside a pair of German boots from 1944. The difference is clear even to visitors with no military background. The American boots are sturdy and whole. The German boots are cracked and patched. A spare lace lies between them, coiled neatly on a small plaque. For veterans, these displays brought back sharp memories. Some American soldiers were surprised to learn how important these items had been. During the war, they had seen their gear as normal and unremarkable. It never occurred to them that their enemy saw those same items as signs of overwhelming power. German veterans, standing in those museums decades later, sometimes explained the story to their grandchildren. They pointed to the lace and said that it told a truth about the war that maps and medals could not. It was a reminder of what it felt like to fight without enough, to march in pain, to know the other side never had to face those same hardships. The story of the laces spread slowly, told in memoirs, books, and conversations. It was not a tale of glory or heroism. It was a story of preparation, of what happens when one side is ready for every problem and the other is forced to improvise. Even today, military planners study the lessons of that winter. They know that a broken bootlace can slow a march, delay an attack, or cost lives. They know that soldiers must be equipped for the smallest needs if they are to succeed in the largest battles. The Ardennes forest is quiet now. The snow falls silently on the old battlefields. In some places, rusted fragments of war still lie buried beneath the trees. Among them, a lone bootlace may remain, a simple piece of string that once carried the weight of an army's fate.